All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Hope you're enjoying Parcel Forum so far. This is Unlocking Parcel Potential, how integrating systems and strategy can optimize your parcel program. Is that what we're going to talk about?
I think so.
Okay, good. All right. First, you turn the clicker on. Then, second, talk about housekeeping notes. You'll see this every session if you haven't figured it out already. Rate this session. Give us your feedback, how it works. Note the app will only let you go forward if you give it 5 stars. So you got to do that. I'm sure I'm the first one to make that joke this morning, third session in. And then seriously though, submit your best tip. What you get out of this, we'd love to know. The folks that put this together really want to figure out what works, what doesn't, to make this show even better. This is one of my favorite shows of the year, not just to speak up, but also to attend. So we really want to keep this great. So first off, introduction. So Megan?
Sure. Hi, good morning. Thanks for spending some time with us. My name's Megan Rudolph. I'm the Regional Senior Director of Parcel Operations at Saddle Creek. I've been at Saddle Creek for 5 years, and I oversee our parcel operations. So I head up everything related to our direct-to-consumer delivery strategy and any function for parcels that ship under Saddle Creek managed accounts. So prior to joining Saddle Creek, I spent some time at UPS, and then I was with DHL e-commerce and spent a little bit of time at Transportation Insight. So I've seen the carrier side, I've seen the consultant data analytics side, and I'd say my 15 years of experience has really been focused on parcel supply chain solutions, e-commerce distribution strategy, strategic partnerships, and leveraging data to build solutions as well. So
very cool. And shameless plug for Megan, by the way. Yesterday, Megan was also named by Supply and Demand Chain Executive, basically one of the Women in Supply Chain Award winners. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Timing could not have been better for that coming out.
Yeah.
And I'm Steve Conger, Vice President of Warehouse Systems for Saddle Creek. By the way, a little bit about Saddle Creek, third-party logistics company, 49 locations throughout the country, about 33 million square feet of warehouse space under our roof. So my role, I oversee order management, warehouse management, and parcel systems, as well as integration for our business, so pretty much all the operational systems. Prior to Saddle Creek, I spent about 11 and a half years at Fanatics. For those who don't know, Fanatics, parent company of NFL Shop, NBA Store, and the Goliath now of the sports industry. It was not always that way. I started with them in 2004 with a $5 million company, of which $3 million were 2 stores in the area. We had this little internet operation in the corner, almost literally. And we grew to be, far and away the number 1 sports retailer on the internet. So over there, I oversaw pretty much the same system stack, OMS, WMS, as well as parcel systems and our on-demand merchandise. So go through the agenda real quick. Obviously, the theme of this is going to be mixing parcel strategy with systems and the harmony that creates. So, the goals, we really want to talk about the system strategies for how do you balance parcel costs with that consumer experience, that expectation. We're going to talk about a little bit of tools and the processes that we use. Hopefully you can get, this will help you in your own, your own backgrounds that, once you get back home. And then how do you gain that practical knowledge for how do you collaborate? Because one of the things we're going to talk about, and this is going to be a theme, is where we've gotten to requires a lot of collaboration between Megan's team and my team. And that's really going to be the goal of this. Now, as we get into it, Megan, why don't we start off talking a little bit about some of the dynamics in the market?
Sure. Yep. So we can go to the next one. So I've been doing this since about 2010. I'm sure a lot of your experiences in the room is similar. To put that in perspective and to also age several of us, is about 2% of the US population had a Prime membership, and Amazon Prime membership. So being able to organically grow with this has been a really great experience, and you get to see a lot of the year-over-year changes. One thing that's been constant about this since I entered the industry is just the amount of change, specifically change that's outside of your control that's driven by the carrier. But we'll focus on the change that's happened in the last 5 years, because what I'm seeing is the pace of change, as well as the number of changes, has just increased year over year, specifically within the last 5 years. So what we're seeing today in 2025, or this year in 2025, is already, surpassing what we saw in 2024. And so here we focus on, 5 key themes that we see. The biggest one being carrier surcharges, right? So the number of carrier surcharges that are being added, as well as the amount that they're applying to the existing surcharges, are increasing annually and throughout the year. And so it becomes difficult to manage your year-over-year costs when you're dealing with these unpredictable things. And so you're needing to leverage a lot of optimization, a lot of analytics to understand how could I mitigate some of this through maybe different service strategies. And on top of the carrier increases, there's, an escalating year-over-year increase for shippers. And you'd be surprised at how often shippers aren't really effectively managing this. They're just taking this GRI year over year. But fortunately for shippers, is the market dynamics have shifted quite a bit. And we're leaning more towards, for the first time in a while, I would say a shipper's market, and we continue to see that. And I'll dive into that a little bit more specifically on the next slide. But in order to leverage what's happening in the market, you need to be able to have the system to set it up to really understand these multi-node, multi-carrier strategy. And so you really have to lean into technology to enable those cost benefits. I want to see if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about right now as a shipper's market, 4 years ago, it really wasn't that way. One of my favorite things from the tech perspective was we had carriers that were adding surcharges so fast that their own software that they provide for rating didn't accurately rate the surcharge. Which is a little mind-blowing, that basically they were adding it faster than their own tech team could implement it. To give an idea of how much the market has really, honestly, done a 180 through the years.
Yep. You bring up a good point. Not to go on a tangent, I'll do my best not to go on too many of those. But when we're interviewing candidates for our team or cross-functional teams, we make it a point to ask some scenario-based questions to understand how can they pivot and problem solve on the fly. That's really critical to what we do. If I'm interviewing someone and I think they're going to be someone that likes to come to work every day, kind of know what they're doing, not have any bombs dropped on them, for example, a 22% increase 2 days before Christmas with 4 days operating notice. I don't know if anybody had one of those at the end of. I see a few faces in the room, so y'all know what I'm talking about. So we need to know that we're bringing on a team of resources on my team, as well as the system side, that can handle and effectively manage those kind of changes for us and our clients.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, no, so one of the unique things I think about the parcel industry, compared to all the other teams that I oversee, it's probably the systems team that requires the most business knowledge. You need people, and I think it's important, you need people that can basically do what my kids do and ask why after everything I tell them. It's really important to have.
Yep. And the last thing to call out before we go to the next slide is, we're seeing, a lot of factors regarding tariffs and trade regulations that are creating cost upstream, and that's creating downstream pressures. And for a lot of clients, a lot of shippers in this space, the cost of shipping is, one of the most expensive costs. So they're looking to save where they can make the biggest impact. And so we're seeing a lot of cost pressures to further reduce as these rates continue to increase year over year. So let's dig into the market dynamics a little bit more. So one thing we know right now is there's a surplus of capacity in the market. I think the last report showed that UPS and FedEx are between 67 to 75% at capacity. As a result of that, they're actively downsizing and reconfiguring their network to adjust to the new volumes. What's interesting, though, is the market is still growing, right? We've come out of that post-pandemic hypergrowth, and we're still seeing year-over-year growth, but we're seeing it in alternative networks. And for the first time since I've been in this industry, we're really seeing a more competitive landscape with these private networks and these regional carriers. And we're also seeing there's enough software and resources out there now that previously, to leverage a multi-carrier strategy and take advantage of what's going on, that was more reserved to upper mid large enterprise shippers, right? But now I would say essentially any size shipper can adopt a strategy like this as long as you have the right systems, tools, and resources to leverage. And the other thing I would say is that within, I don't want to speak too much on the system side, but there's more knowledge, to your point, about systems and how to understand the business side of, what are we trying to do to reach e-commerce consumer demands, right? And we'll go into that as well. But ultimately, we're looking to, fast, low-cost shipping that's reliable and flexible, right? And so that's the changes that have happened coming out of the pandemic have really enabled that. So, yeah. Focusing on consumers, right? So understanding what's happening in the market, understanding how to negotiate in the market, is a piece of the puzzle. The next biggest piece of the puzzle that I talk about often is consumer behavior and demands really is the key to inform your path forward regarding your order fulfillment and delivery strategies, right? And so what are the consumers looking for coming out of the pandemic? So the same priorities are the same priorities that we saw, right? So that's top 5 is going to be speed, cost, not in this order, speed, cost, flexibility, convenience, and reliability. And what we saw though is what has shifted is speed has historically been number 1 for a really long time. A lot of shippers, a lot of consumers were putting pressure on that same day, next day. What we've seen is what used to be first in terms of priority has dropped to 5th. And so it's been replaced by a higher priority to cost, a higher priority to reliability, as well as convenience and flexibility. So when we say, so speed is still very important.
Mm-hmm.
It just has taken a little bit of a backseat. McKinsey & Associates puts out one of my favorite voice to the consumer surveys. And the most recent data says that 90% of consumers are willing to wait up to 3 days for their order. And what's interesting is the willingness to purchase doesn't really drop significantly until the delivery goes beyond 7 days. So we're really seeing a tolerance. And I have a caveat that this will differ by market. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but we're really seeing a longer tolerance for that. And what the focus is now has been on cost. Like, how can we avoid some shipping charges, right? And so you're having to get creative. These costs are increasing year over year. And so you have to get creative with the shipping options, increasing your minimum order value, having flexible options at checkout, all help reduce that to help offset that cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to the speed thing. I think the consumer is realizing that pencil I buying on Amazon that's $3,
Yeah.
I really don't need it tomorrow. Now, there's the element of I'm paying for Prime, so I want to get what I'm paying for. But realistically, and that's really been a boon to all the other e-commerce companies that don't have a Prime type service or that availability. The key though is it's really been replaced by setting the expectation. So fine, if it's going to be here in 4 days, that's fine. It needs to be here in 4 days.
I will say though that somebody forgot to do school supply shopping, and so I did need it in a day. So it goes back to that convenience, so flexibility. So give me the choice to make sure that procrastinating Megan gets all of the supplies delivered on the teacher on time. So, so one thing I want to talk about, I think there were a couple other things on that slide, but we'll talk through it throughout the rest of this. That's fine. One thing I see when we're solutioning something. So, piece of the puzzle is understanding the network, right? Understanding the consumers, and then, identifying like, how do we meet the cost, the speed, reliability, flexibility, all of those things. And a lot of it really determines on the perspective in which you operate. And one blind spot I see specifically with third-party providers is operating from a provider's perspective. So we're, really focused on what's happening in the 4 walls, optimizing within the 4 walls, solutioning within the 4 walls. And that's going to serve the provider well, but you're not going to serve the consumer very well when you're operating like that. So you really need to operate from a consumer's perspective. And so what I mean by that is from the time a client is on a website and they're going through their buying journey, right? You need to make as many options available and accessible and visible in real time, because once that order is placed, the order lifecycle starts when the order is placed through the fulfillment process to delivery and potentially a return. And so and that's really critical, because when a brand no longer has the ability to physically engage and impact a buying experience, I'm not walking into Madewell and buying jeans in store. So I don't have that opportunity to engage with an associate that's going to impact my buying experience. The order fulfillment process now becomes that buying experience and what builds brand loyalty, right? So that experience really needs to be, what is the experience I want to deliver to my client now that I don't have that physical engagement? And in order to accomplish that, my side of the equation solutions everything that's happening, and we understand how to do it, but it really becomes critical on the technical side to give that visibility to that whole order lifecycle process. So I don't know, Steve, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's really when it comes to things like the reliability, that's really where it's important. I mean, whether you're a shipper or a 3PL, the consumer didn't pick the parcel carrier that they offered you. That's the brand's choice or the 3PL's choice how they ship it. So it's not the other guy's problem. So if a package is late, the consumer doesn't want to hear, well, we shipped it on time, but carrier X was late. They don't care. They just care they didn't get their stuff.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. They want to know, they want to know when it's going to be there. They want you to deliver on that commitment. That goes back to the reliability piece, right? Since there's less of an emphasis on speed, the emphasis on reliability has trumped that. So let me know when it's going to get there, and let me know when there's going to be an exception. And the tolerance, I think about 85% of consumers say that a fair tolerance is like a day late, right? So, but making sure that you're communicating those expectations when it is going to be late.
absolutely. All right, so we talked a lot about market. We talked a lot about the theory, the principles. Now we're going to talk a little bit more real world. So let's talk through we're going to showcase a few examples that Megan's team and my team both have had to deal with our clients.
Mhm.
And we're going to talk about how we solved it from both the strategy as well as the system side. So
Yep.
I'll start with the network.
Yep. So one thing that you'll hear throughout many of these sessions is diversifying your carrier network, right? Again, I mentioned earlier that this is no longer reserved for those large enterprise type shippers, right? A multi-carrier network is really accessible as long as you understand what's the goal that you're trying to accomplish. And whenever you're able to effectively do that, we're able to see savings beyond what you're able to accomplish in a negotiation, because you can dynamically rate between rate, transit, whatever that goal is. And it's really important to set those clear goals. And what I mean by that is, are you looking to reduce transit without increasing cost? Or are you looking to reduce costs while maintaining current transit, right? Rate shopping shouldn't be, hey, I'm going to save money because I'm now selecting a slower service. You should still deliver it within that 3-day, but leverage a more economy option when available, is what we mean by that. And we can jump into the real world example. So want to talk about the impact that we had recently with one of our clients. And we had a nutrition company that came to us, was single sourcing with Parcel with a previous provider. And when we looked at the solution, we said, okay, we really need to move you to a more central node. So immediately that reduces their average zone and their rate. And on top of that, they went from single sourcing to rate shopping across a multitude of carriers. And we saved them over 29%. They are a pretty significant size shipper, so we're talking 7 figures here. And when you look at the savings, let's say 12% of that really came from just leveraging negotiated rates, but the bulk of that came from and still comes from rate shopping and optimization. So in addition to that, we also looked at optimization across modes. So where their minimum threshold was for LTL orders, we looked at that, analyzed, and realized that if we raised it and those went as a multi-piece parcel order, we could save them 44% on those particular orders. We also worked with the client and operations to do a custom cut carton to improve package density. So it lowered their billable weight while also reducing damages. And what the graph represents is the impact of a non-optimized versus an optimized strategy. So year one represents, adding rate shopping. And then, so year one would be 2024, after having worked with us for a year. 2025 would be, not only did we mitigate the rate increase, we were able to leverage what was going on in the market to improve our negotiated rates, and we also enhanced some of the services with that. And so it's not often that you see this trend line, right, when you're looking at year-over-year parcel cost. But we were able to mitigate the rate increase and save them some money. And then this year we also added another regional carrier, which saved them additional. And then we expect to fully mitigate the rate increase going into 2026 with the last strategy that we were implementing right now. And the orange line represents if they were to do nothing, which hypothetically they likely wouldn't have done nothing, but just in between without having the systems and the strategy and the operations side, it's really difficult to really have that kind of trend going into year over year while the clients has other variables around growth. And, I think the interesting thing about this is their average weight increased because they launched new products. So their cost per piece is decreasing despite that additional variable. So you want to talk about the tools?
Yeah. So how do we make this happen? So the biggest thing here was multi-carrier shipping software. Kind of in the industry, an oldie but a goodie. They've been around for a while, but at the same time, the adoption still is not what you think it would be. For us, this is key. This is our engine that we use to ensure that we're selecting either the most cost-effective based on pure rate most cost effective based on transit. So if it's a 3-day order, what's the cheapest way to get it there? As well as date shopping. So for those who don't know, date shopping is kind of flipping the paradigm on its head. So instead of saying, I want 3-day service or I want 5-day service, it's saying, I want the package on September 12th. Do whatever you need to do to get it there on September 12th. And so the system will then do that. It'll go through all of its carrier options and say what's going to get it there on September 12th. It also allows you to really streamline the workflow. So, for example, maybe certain orders, they're VIP customers, we want to kick that up a day. So instead of 5 days, we want that to be 4 or 3. That system can then handle that sort of thing as well as kind of the weirdo scenarios like, let's say you have a particular client that wants their orders fulfilled on Friday in a different manner because it's perishable and you don't want it to sit on a truck. That kind of stuff are some scenarios that sometimes we have to deal with. But the idea is you want to keep the shipping costs low while still managing to to make it the consumer experience. And the key is carrier autonomy with a multi-carrier shipping solution, because we're not bound to any one carrier by our software. We can use pretty much any carrier we want, and that's a really, really important thing. So if Megan and her team find, hey, we have this new carrier that can do this, and it can get the package there in 6 hours across the country, and it costs 35 cents. Not really. But if we find one of those, we have the ability to then implement that and then include that in the shop, because that regional carrier may not service every zip code in the country.
Right.
So the other way that we do this is through how we optimize the shipment. So Megan touched on this a little bit. At this point, show of hands, anybody not familiar with dimensional weight or don't understand what dimensional weight is? I think we're good. So obviously dimensional weight's been around for a long time at this point. Started out as mostly an air service, with ground being an exception if it was really large. Now pretty much anything you ship has dimensional weight. So the way dimensional weight is optimized is through weights and dims. Both weights and dims of your carton that you're shipping it or your mailer, but also weights and dims of your items and your item master. That is something that's very, very important to have, because that can also control things like slotting in your warehouse or robotics or locations or your cube in there. So it really plays into everything. And then when it comes to the shipping part, the cartonization is very, very important, because you screw up weights and dims, the carrier is going to make sure that they correct it if it's in their favor. Like, if it's not in their favor, your miles may vary whether or not they're going to actually give you the credit back. So how do we do that? One, our WMS helps that. The other thing is we use a mobile dimensionalizer. So in our inbound departments, our handhelds actually double as it was basically a mobile cube device. So when you're receiving it, if you have to dimensionalize that one item, we could bring it there, put it on a Bluetooth scale, capture the weights and dimensions right there from the handheld. So this makes sense for a scenario of one facility. So what about network optimization?
Yep. So we covered, diversifying your portfolio, package optimization. The next thing that's going to be a constant theme is network optimization, right? And so understanding, what is the right fit for you is important. What are the goals you're trying to achieve, right? And that's going to depend on order profile. That's going to depend on consumer expectations, consumer density, as well as, your ability to manage inventory across multiple nodes. And so what we found is, let's take, for example, that last example we talked through. We've looked at adding a second node for them. And right now, the savings achieved on Parcel would not offset the cost of that inventory redundancy. So just because you're hearing things about adding multiple nodes doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right fit for you. In most cases, it is, I'd say. But there's also variables that as you grow in complexity, you need to be able to effectively manage, because we see when a client's maybe managing some of their order routing, they're shipping stuff from Pennsylvania to Southern California, and our data can say, hey, let's hone this in a little bit, right? But that would never happen if they're using our order routing,
yep.
Right? But with this, I would say that, when you're looking at it, it's important to understand your data, understand proximity to the parcel hubs, specifically ones that are highly automated or ones that have a really strong ground processing, and knowing what your inbound requirements are. Like, do you need to be close to a port based on the number of containers that you're receiving? So there's a lot of factors there. But the carriers have really built out a strong ground footprint that you could really reach 98% of the U.S. population within 2 to 3 days and from 2 nodes. So, and then the next one. So we can jump into another real world example. We were working with a baby product company, and but prior to coming to Saddle Creek, they were in 2 nodes at the time. We looked at their growth trajectory as well as their actual data, and we decided to put them in 4 strategic locations: so Southern California, Fort Worth, Atlanta, and Pennsylvania. And so in the first year that they moved to us, by reducing their average zone, as well as leveraging the negotiated rates, because we hadn't implemented rate shopping at this time, we were able to save them $1 million just with those 2 changes. And they're very sensitive to transit, and so they didn't want to make a change to a carrier and rate shop. They wanted to know, okay, I want to continue to use X service that I know has a 2-day commitment. They at first were hesitant to leverage an economy service. And so a year after we had onboarded, we said, okay, are you ready to test this? Because the savings is significant. We tested, and their average transit before rate shopping was 1.8 days. And once we fully implemented it, it stayed at 1.8 days, and we saved them another $1 million that year. And so we're talking, again, significant savings. And some of this stuff was happening in 2021 and 2022. And for those of you who were around, negotiating rates around that time was pretty difficult. I think it was like the bottom of the carrier's willingness to be aggressive when it came to pricing.
Yeah.
So again, another chart that shows the trajectory from when they were with a different provider, came to us in 2022. 2022 is when we optimized their modes and they got into our negotiated rates. 2023 is when we implemented rate shopping. And then we essentially mitigated both of their rate increases for 2020, 24, and 25. There's a slight uptick there because their average weight based on their kits that they were building increased. And then they're going to save an additional $900,000 in 2025 by the implementation of the regional carrier that we put in front of them. So you want to talk about the tools and how we did that?
Yeah, and I mean, this is a good example because, I mean, talk about an industry that's very transit sensitive. Like, no company wants to piss off a mom of a young baby. Like, so this is something that we really, had to take seriously. One of the things I'm very proud about with this company is we were able to start them up and be shipping in 4 weeks. Post-pandemic, supply chains were still a little tight, especially with baby stuff. So this is one we're really proud of. So now, we talked about multi-carrier shipping. That's important, but that's not going to get you there with this model in the 4 locations. So this is where an OMS, or an order management system, really comes in, because it's going to then have that real-time consolidated visibility, because you really need both the inventory as well as the geography in order to properly route an order. So, for example, if the consumer is in Southern California, yeah, it's wonderful that we have a facility in Buena Park, but it's only wonderful if we actually have the whole order there. Because if not, then it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good. So that intelligent order routing, though, can be customized in any OMS, or at least a top-tier OMS, for things like, let's say it was a 4-item order and 3 items are at the facility. Well, choice A, you can back order the whole order, wait for them to all come in, and then ship it from the closest facility. That's obviously the most cost-sensitive way. You can split the order, ship everything you can from the closest facility, and send them a second package. Or 3, you could ship them the items that you have in stock, back order the one line, and then when it comes in, ship that from the closest facility. And there's probably a few other variations of that you can really get down to if you really wanted to. But the idea is, if we were to go to 3 clients and ask them that scenario, we're probably going to get 3 different answers, because the nature of their product and the nature of their business tends to determine how they want to do that. And so one of the keys from a tech perspective is to be able to say, okay, client A, you want something done this way. Client B, you want it done that way. That's fine. We'll work with both. And that's really the idea about it. But the other thing is, tying back to something we talked about earlier, the job is done when the consumer gets the package, not when you put it on the carrier's truck. And that's why, as part of that OMS, is visibility from order all the way to delivery and every step in between.
Do you want to also touch on disruptions? What happened?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So another example is with disruption. So, for example, baby products are very sensitive to that. Well, I don't know if you guys remember a couple of years back when it got a little cold in Texas and the entire state shut down because it's not supposed to get cold in Texas. You guys remember that at all? Sorry, Texas people. Well, so because of that, we had our distribution center in this example back here in Fort Worth. It was shut down for 4 days, and it was shut down because people could not get to work. Roads were there. So within about 15 minutes, we were able to adjust the order routing to just route around that facility. So from a consumer perspective, yes, the shipping was a little more expensive because it shipped from suboptimal locations, but the consumer didn't notice it. So the consumer got their package as if nothing happened. And that's really an advantage of having a redundant shipping network.
Yeah, most definitely.
Now, all of this is great. All this is, wonderful. At the end of it, the thing that drives all of this is data. Megan, you want to talk about that?
Of course. So for those who know me, know that parcel data is one of my favorite things to talk about. Yes, I can nerd out with parcel data all day long. It's calling someone a nerd on our teams is a term of endearment. So it's true. But one of the reasons I am so passionate about it is because all of the things that we're talking about are not accessible without good quality data, right? So unlocking the savings potential, the optimization strategies really all points back to data. And getting your data is one thing, understanding your data is another. And so Steve mentioned earlier that, his systems team really need to have an understanding of the business acumen on the parcel side. My team also has to have a pretty strong acumen when it comes to the data and the systems, because it is changing so much to know, okay, if we change this, how is it going to impact this setup over here? So that's why the collaboration between the two and the overarching theme of this session is that you really need both. So you need to understand your data, you need to understand how you're going to use it, and you also need to get access to it. So one of the things we'll talk about, we talk about often is weights and dims. There's an ongoing joke, but not really, that we're eventually going to make weights and dims merch with the marketing team because of how often it comes up and how important it is. And that's because weights and dims really feeds the whole process, right? And we're talking weights and dims at the SKU level because the SKU weights and dims are going to feed cartonization, right? So I'm ordering these 3 items, and then I need to select what is the most optimal shipper poly mailer to put those items into that box or bag to reduce the billable weight, right? And so then those total weight and dims, so the external dims of the actual shipment, the aggregate weight of all of those things is then set to the rate shopping logic to choose the least cost option that meets the delivery speed, right? And I don't know if you mentioned slotting. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that also, because that also can bring other benefits. Obviously, our focus here is on the parcel side, but at the same time, the warehouse space and the warehouse utilization for efficient picking, for pathing, for how you slot products is really important. And if your DIMs are off, then a strong WMS is going to have a really hard time trying to optimize that. So a good WMS should be able to handle things like slotting. It should be able to handle things like good pathing. Maybe robotics can also do. But at the end of the day, if the data you're feeding it isn't good, it doesn't matter that your WMS can do it. It really doesn't.
Right. And having that internal data, having accurate internal data also helps your auditing process. So if you know what you should expect in terms of cost, accessorials, transit time, you're able to audit the output from the carrier, right? So I'm seeing unexpected charges on this. So we have some clients that ship fishing poles, weight equipment, and they are right as close as you can get to that over max limit. And I don't know if anybody knows how much that is right now, but once you hit it, it's thousands of dollars, right? And so we know, okay, this box has been optimized to not hit that, but then it goes through the dimensions of a carrier network, and we see that on the bill, right? That's an extreme example, but those charges do add up, and being able to audit your expected versus actuals in real time or as close to real time is really critical to avoiding cost. And we saw that, when you're not leveraging the data to do that, there's 10 to 20% of additional charges that are totally avoidable if you're not accurately doing that, right? And so it's one of the things that our team has collaborated. It's actually a part of our, annual goals for our teams in terms of how do we continue to optimize that data and reduce potential waste.
Yeah. Now, I mean, that's a good point because you're never really done getting your data accurate. Like if you're going to add new SKUs, new carriers, you're not done. This doesn't end. And one of the things I'll call out here is if you're a smaller company, obviously smaller companies, big companies, they all have priorities. Highly recommend as a smaller company you start this out. Kind of a war story from my days of Fanatics. we got this data at one point to like 97, 98% accurate. And when you're a small company, 97, 98, like that sounds pretty good. Like, if I'm in school, I'll take a 97. I didn't see many of those in college, but that's good. Because the difference is that 2 and 3%, it's not very much. It's not much. The problem is that model and that mindset doesn't scale, because all of a sudden, if you grow that 2% and the 3%, that can get overwhelming. So putting in those processes early on, and yeah, maybe it's not fancy conveyance systems or things like that early on, but having a process to handle this is really, really important, as well as ensuring that the integration between all the systems in your stack, as well as the users on your floor, are communicating it and synchronizing that accurately. Finally, there's the reporting element, and we're going to talk on reporting here in a second. How do we validate it? We think we're doing it accurately. It seems like we're doing it accurately, but the reporting is really what ties that in, and the analytics really tie that in. And that's actually a good segue to the next thing we're going to talk about here.
Yep. So, and the last example we'll share with you is we had a celebrity startup brand that we were potentially working with. And they were very passionate about their product. They didn't understand the e-commerce delivery costs, all those things. And so we really worked with them to understand, okay, we don't have any data. It's a startup, right? So let's understand, what is the competitive landscape? What is what are some of the package design of the actual product, as well as the packaging of the product that you're considering, right? What is the consumer expectation you want to deliver on? What's your average order value? We took all of those inputs, and then we took, this, plethora of data that we have with like type shippers, and we said, okay, here's scenario A, B, and C for you. And this really informed the path forward of what should their shopping cart options look like to their consumers as they're building the website, right? And so with that, and I will often recommend like a good, better, best approach when it comes to those shopping cart options. And they're going to differ based on, your average order value, your consumer expectations. But what we landed on is, for this client, good is going to be their free economy shipping, right? Delivery within 2 to 6 days. Better is going to be, for $4.99, you can upgrade to guaranteed 2 to 3 day delivery. Or if you are a procrastinator and waited to order, you can choose to upgrade if you need it in a day for $19.99, right? And so what that did is it reduced their expected and forecasted parcel costs by 50%, right? Because we're offering competitive options, that flexibility, reliability, and then we're leveraging rate shopping on the back end to say, hey, we can get it there in 2 days via an economy service, right? And there's some instances where I think that they're, making money on some of those next day because we're leveraging around. And what's also key to that is to not commit to a service, right? So we talked about carrier autonomy. You don't want to say FedEx home delivery in your shopping cart. You want to say 2 to 3 days, or you say deliver by Friday, September the 12th, right? And that allows you to understand what's the commitment and then select the least cost option that meets that commitment.
Yep.
So you want to add
anything? Yeah, and it's really, one of the things you mentioned is with celebrity brands, one of the challenges there is the ebb and flows of business. All of a sudden, if the celebrity decides to tweet something or Instagram or like, I don't know what it's called to do. I'm not a social media like cool kid, but like they are. And all of a sudden they drop something on social media and all of a sudden volume skyrockets. All the more reason, by the way, that having that data behind the scenes, having that accurate to start is good, because you never know when a spike is going to happen. Mm-hmm. But we also talked a lot about how that is executed. The execution through like multi-carrier shipping, execution like order management. Now, what's the back end of that? And that's really where Parcel Analytics comes in, because the idea behind Parcel Analytics is you're looking at trends over time. You're looking at oftentimes the shipment after the fact. So it doesn't have to be real-time data. It's more BI or business intelligence style data, where you're looking at after the fact. You're monitoring the performance of the services. You're monitoring performance of the carriers. And you understand that, for example, in those peak periods, if something skyrockets, you may need to put in some things into your execution system, things like carrier volume balancing. So, for example, let's say you get a 300% spike. Well, the carrier may not. I mean, right now, because of the parcel capacity, they probably could. But if parcel capacity gets tight again, which it will at some point, it's going to. having that in place so we know, okay, we can only ship X amount of packages with a particular service a day. Well, we're not going to go to the celebrity that runs the brand and say, we can't ship any more orders for you. Like, you can probably ballpark how that conversation would go. So having alternatives in place and learning that through the analytics is very, very important. And then you use that for how you model the distribution network. If a particular brand grows dramatically, it might make sense to add nodes. It might make sense to move nodes depending on their volume. So Megan touched on some of the system things and how we talked about optimizing that parcel program. So a lot of this also has to do with the cart up front. So for example, if your average order value is, let's say, $38, well, having free shipping over 30 may not make sense because you're not incentivizing that consumer to, add that one more thing into the cart. In that example, having your free shipping threshold a little bit higher may make more sense to help drive revenue and drive sales. Like Megan touched on, offering the service selections and having a variety of services that the consumer can pick from is really, really key. Nothing is more frustrating than when if you buy something online, they're like, ooh, I really want it. Well, your only option is economy service. We don't even offer the option for you to buy out. It's a frustrating experience for the consumer. So having that option there is very, very important. Tying in with the execution. So for example, let's say you're offering a consumer 2 or 3 days shipping. Well, that doesn't automatically mean you want to put every one of those packages on an airplane with an express service. That's why rate shopping and dynamic service selection really comes into play, because if you're centrally located, oftentimes a ground service can hit that destination in 2 or 3 days, but you have to know where it can and where it can't. So that's one way you can optimize that and also keep that price for the consumer. And then we mentioned this earlier, having that end-to-end visibility. So we talked about systems, and we've thrown a lot of things here about systems and how do we pick systems. So, when we're looking at a systems, these are some of the things that we look at to say, let's figure out what we want to do. So for us, we want to understand the current pain points. Now, while the tech expectation it brings some of the pain points, really that's, to me, it needs to be business driven. What is the industry problem we're trying to solve? Great software is wonderful, but if it doesn't actually solve your business need, then it's kind of a toy. It doesn't really help a lot. From a shipping perspective, what are your points of origin? What are your destinations? So for example, if you're only US based, but you ship internationally, that's one set of complexities. Because I know, international shipping and compliance is everyone's favorite topic, right, Megan?
Oh, my favorite.
Absolutely. Now, a different set of complexities is what if you have international origins and you're starting shipments out internationally? That creates a different set of issues, and it may drive some system choices down there. How does it integrate with the rest of your stack? That's very, very important because we talked about the data, we talked about everything there, and really all of that needs to drive together. And then finally, what are the pricing models? Does it make sense to pay transactionally? Does it make sense to have more of an enterprise license? There's pros and cons to both. We have some systems that span both sides, but there are reasons why you might have, one or the other. So to wrap this kind of up, Megan, why don't we talk about how we have been able to align your team and my team?
Yeah, I would say the collaboration over the last 5 years has really enabled us to meet the changing demands of the market. We're able to smoothly adapt as we need to. It also allows us to innovate. I would say, Steve and I, as leaders of both of these groups, our personality and how we manage things is a little bit different. I'm a little bit risk averse, right? But Steve is like, hey, let's try it out. What's the worst that can happen, right? And so you kind of balance that, which makes a pretty big difference. But I would say, one of the biggest things is getting alignment on the strategic objectives, right? Understanding what it is we're trying to accomplish as an organization, what's happening in the market. And then I know you'll go into how we actually do that, right? But, we align a lot of our goals and we're in constant communication.
So how do we do it? So one of the things we do is we establish our roadmap. So when it comes to our parcel program, and it's not a systems roadmap, it's a business roadmap. So we work with Megan's team to say, okay, What do we want to look at in a year? What do we want to be? Where do we want to be in 2 years? Where do we want to be in 3 years? Sorry, I know it's like the quintessential interview question. Where do you want to be in 3 years? But it actually kind of applies here. And we need to tie that to goals. So the idea is to make sure that the items on that roadmap are then vertically integrated down to people's APRs, down to the goals of the team, down to the systems. Regular checkpoints. So our teams do a collaboration call every other week, 30-minute call. It's not, we want to use that call not for passing word, because you can pass word in a lot of different mechanisms. You don't have to get on the phone to do that. I'm sure nobody's ever been in that meeting that could have been an email. Like, you don't want that. What you want that for is you want to reserve that time for things that you actually have to talk through, where decisions need to be made. You want to understand pros and cons, that sort of thing. We also do an annual multi-day summit, once a year, where we get the teams together, really start strategizing. That's where we pull out that roadmap and say, okay, does this still align? Do we update it? That sort of thing. And then we use a little bit of an iterative approach to our planning. So we work in Scrum. We do every 2 week sprints. We have our backlog, all of that. Obviously, we're not going to spend a lot of time on Scrum and what that is, but the idea is an iterative approach for us makes the most sense, because it allows the business to stay agile. If you don't have an agile approach, then you're going to lock the business into, where you don't really want to be. What I would equate the departments to be like, think about it this way. Think about a doctor versus a pharmacist. So the doctor's going to do the diagnostic. The doctor's going to set the course of treatment, all that. You then got to go to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist is really where the rubber meets the road. You get your prescription, that sort of thing. So think about it that way.
I think Steve just made me an MD, is what I heard.
I did. So wrapping up, and then we'll have time for a little question. So first of all, when you're going through this, the biggest thing is to assess your needs, set that road, set that process, understand where you are, where you want to be, put that roadmap together, which is not going to happen overnight. One of the keys is, if you think about where you are versus where you want to be, it's probably not a tomorrow thing. It's probably going to take, months or years into the future to really get to what you consider nirvana. And by the way, you're never done. So it's a constant exercise in order to do that. Evaluation of your systems. One of the things from a tech perspective that I would, caution against, there's no system that's somebody's baby. Like, we need to constantly evaluate your systems, make sure your systems make sense now, make sure your systems make sense 3 years down the road. We love our software partners, but at the same time, if you have a system that's just not meeting your needs, obviously try to work with that partner. But at the end of the day, if it's just not going to get there, then maybe you need to look at that. And then lastly, data. Get your data right. It has to be right, because all the great system stuff in the world doesn't matter if your data is trash.